Good evening, everyone. This is not a planned post that I'm doing or a live stream that I was planning to do, but I felt like since I didn't do a Bible study last Wednesday, that I should do something to make up for it a little bit. I am feeling better today. I'm not 100%, but I am better. And the topic for this uh, stream tonight is the origin of Satan. And the reason I decided to do this is because I feel like there are way too many people who have incorrect beliefs about the origin of Satan. And I think that it's important to really investigate what the Bible actually reveals and to understand it correctly. That's always been my goal, and that will always be my goal to better understand God's Word more accurately. And I hope that I can help some of you as well. I'm also hoping that this is a topic that might interest you. So uh, let me present some things to you that you may not have heard or considered before. I'm hoping this is not too above your head or anything. I'm going to try to make it as easy to understand as possible. I'm not a PhD and I don't claim to be, but I have studied the Bible since I was very young and I study it every day. So here we go. Many believe that Satan was a high ranking angel of God who was cast out of heaven. Um, I, I don't believe this is what the Bible teaches at all, by the way. That is what many who claim to be Christian believe, that Satan was an angel cast out of heaven. And it's also not just believed by many who claim to be Christian, but it's believed and taught by many of the theologians, pastors, preachers, and Bible scholars even today. This is a widely held belief about Satan. But you might be surprised to learn that this isn't what the Bible reveals about the origin of Satan at all. Um, the popular teaching about the fall of Satan normally follows this or a similar outline. This is what most people teach. Satan was once a beautiful angel, the greatest of all created beings. He rebelled against God and became the devil before man was created. Let me preface this by the fact that none of that is in the Bible. Let's continue. The story goes, originally there were three archangels, Michael, Gabriel, and Lucifer, also not in the Bible. Um, each one ruled a third of the angels. Michael and Gabriel remained faithful to God, but Satan rebelled, taking one third of the angels with him, who became demonic forces. Some will teach that Satan was the heavenly choir master. Hi, Andy. With musical instruments built into his body. This is supported from a passage in Ezekiel chapter 28, verse 13. Okay, thank you very much for sharing that, Andy. Hope you can come back and watch the rest later. Um, Ezekiel 28, verse 13 says, the workmanship of thy tabrets and thy pipes was prepared in thee in the day that thou wast created. However, this translation is only found in the Old King James Version, although the New King James Version is very similar in the wording. The New Revised Standard Version renders that verse as, "And worked in gold were your settings and your engravings," with a footnote indicating that the meaning of the Hebrew is uncertain. The NIV is also as follows: "Your settings and mountings were made of gold. On the day you were created, they were prepared." Also, with a footnote saying that the meaning of the Hebrew is uncertain. There are two passages that are typically referred to in the Old Testament to support this belief about Satan falling from heaven. Admittedly, when you are just casually reading, it can seem like this is obviously what you're being taught by the passages, that Satan fell from heaven. Yet, these passages do not actually teach that. The passages in the Old Testament that people point to in regard to Satan falling from heaven are Isaiah chapter 14, verses 12 through 14, and Ezekiel chapter 28, verses 12 through 15. The two passages, Isaiah, the one in Isaiah is actually a taunt against the king of Babylon. And the passage in Ezekiel is a lament about the king of Tyre. Because Satan is not specifically named in either passage, we should be cautious about making any claim that they are describing Satan. This would be an interpretation of the text, which is open to different opinions rather than a direct observation. It's also important to note that both of these passages are written in poetry, using the vivid picture language and imagery typically employed by the Old Testament prophets. I call it figurative language myself. Let's investigate these two passages a little further, though. Let's start with the passage in Isaiah. Isaiah chapter 14, verses 12 through 15 read, "How you are fallen from heaven, O Lucifer, son of the morning! How you are cut down to the ground, you who weakened the nations! For you have said in your heart, I will ascend into heaven. I will exalt my throne above the stars of God. I will also sit on the mount of the congregation. On the farthest sides of the north, I will ascend above the heights of the clouds. I will be like the Most High. Yet you shall be brought down to Sheol, to the lowest depths of the pit." And I'm reading from the New King James Version. The name Lucifer only appears in Isaiah chapter 14, verse 12. The Hebrew word that is translated as Lucifer is Helel, Helel, meaning the shining one. That's the literal meaning. In the Septuagint, the translation of the Old Testament into Greek, it was translated Theosphoros, meaning the light bearer. The first time it was translated as Lucifer was in the Latin Vulgate, which was put together by Jerome somewhere between 382 and 404 AD. And in Latin, it's Quomodo sedisti de, I'm sorry, my Latin's terrible. Sedisti de Calo Lucifer, qui mane oriabaris, sorry. In Latin, Lucifer was the name of the planet Venus, the morning star, from a word meaning bright light or light bearer. Venus is the brightest planet in the sky, brighter than any of the stars, and is still known as the morning star today. Isaiah uses it as a name for the king of Babylon, who had set himself among the gods. And if you just read a little before the passage that we read and a little after, even up into chapter 16, it becomes very clear that Isaiah was referring, he even says he was referring to the king of Babylon. So he explains the figurative terms for you. So you don't have to figure it out. It's there. But anyway, Isaiah uses it as a name for the king of Babylon who set himself among the gods. Hi, Swan City. Thank you for coming. Um, let's see. Babylonian worship was strongly based on astrology. Both Babylonians and the Assyrians personified the morning star Venus as their god Ishtar. The meaning of Isaiah is that none of the Babylonian gods are able to save the king, as all gods are powerless before the one true God. In the ancient Near East, it was common practice for kings to believe that they were incarnations of gods. So when a king was defeated in battle and his city was captured, it was a sign that their god had also been defeated by the more powerful god of the victorious enemy. The enemy would normally tear down images of that god and take them captive, placing them in the temple of their own god to demonstrate its power, its superior power. This would explain why the Philistines placed the captured Ark of the Covenant in their temple of the god Dagon. You can read about that in 1 Samuel chapter 5 verses 1 and 2. Jesus calls himself the bright and morning star, or the bright morning star in Revelation chapter 22 verse 16, and is also referred to as the morning star in 2 Peter chapter 1 verse 19. Two other passages of scripture are used to support the teaching that Satan fell from heaven. The first is Luke chapter 10 verse 18, where we read, he, meaning Jesus, said to them, the 70 who were sent out into the harvest field, Jesus said to them, I watched Satan fall from heaven like a flash of lightning. However, when you study this passage in context, this does not refer to a fall of Satan before the beginning of time, but it does refer to the effect of the mission of the 70, and that the effect the mission had on the powers of darkness when they said, Lord, in your name, even the demons submit to us, in Luke chapter 10, verse 17. The second passage in the New Testament that people point to say that Satan fell from heaven is Revelation chapter 12, verses 1 through 12, in which John sees a vision of the great dragon, who is identified as that ancient serpent who is called the devil and Satan in verse 9. Michael and his angels fought against Satan, the deceiver of the whole world, who was thrown down to earth, and his angels with him. The timing of this dramatic event is indicated in verse 10, when the loud voice in heaven says, now have come the salvation and the power of the king and the kingdom of our God and the authority of his Messiah. For the accuser of our brothers has been thrown down. This did not happen at the beginning of time, but at the cross, where Jesus brought salvation and demonstrated the power of the kingdom and defeated the enemy. Jesus made a similar statement shortly before his death, saying, now is the judgment of the world. Now the ruler of the world, Satan, will be driven out. And I, when I am lifted up from the earth on the cross, will draw all people to myself. John chapter 12, verse 31. I do want to also state that um, the passages, or the entire book of Revelation, is about the destruction of Jerusalem that was soon to come in 70 AD. It was written before 70 AD, probably around 68 AD, but that's just a guess. But it's definitely before 70 AD that it was written. And it is all about the destruction of Jerusalem, which we will discuss further as I go into this lesson. But so the ultimate triumph of the church is that despite the destruction of Jerusalem and the persecution of Rome, the church would continue to thrive and grow throughout the world. And it did. But let me continue from where I left off here. It's questionable whether either Luke chapter 10 or the passage in Revelation chapter 12 describe a fall of Satan from heaven before the beginning of time. In fact, I'd say it's pretty obvious to me that it's unlikely. That's not at all what it's about. You just have to read a little more carefully the entire area of that book, of each book, and understand the context to really understand what's being said. Also, with Revelation, it is all written in figurative language. These are visions that God gave the Apostle John, and he's describing these visions, and they're in figurative language, and everything is symbolic of something real. Nothing should be taken literally, especially about Satan. But it's more apparent that both these passages describe the defeat of Satan achieved by the ministry, death, and resurrection of Jesus Christ, as well as the continuing growth of the church even after the destruction of Jerusalem and the persecution of Rome against the Christians. There are references to fallen angels in Jude chapter 6, or I'm sorry, Jude verse 6. There's only one chapter. Jude verse 6, and in 2 Peter chapter 2 verse 4. But there is no indication given that Satan was associated with those fallen angels, or that he fell at the same time they did. Both these passages are more probably referring to the rather mysterious account of the time when the sons of God lusted after their daughters of the daughters of men in Genesis chapter 6 verses 1 through 4. And I don't even know that that's accurate, but that's what some people think. Both Peter and Jude use this event as a warning about false teachers, though. That is something that can be known for sure. There are no other passages in the Bible which give a clear and unambiguous teaching about the origin of Satan or of a fall of Satan from a place of glory. So let's ask this question. Is Lucifer a name for Satan? A lot of people believe that. The name Lucifer, as I said, it only appears in Isaiah 14:12. And we already discussed that it means light bearer or something similar, shining one. So I don't think anyone can make a really solid statement that Lucifer is the name of Satan. In English translations, Wycliffe was the first to translate Isaiah 14:12 as Lucifer, presumably because he translated from the Latin Vulgate. And in more modern English, it would read as follows: Ah, Lucifer, that rises early, how you have fallen down from heaven. This translation was followed by the King James Version: How art thou fallen from heaven, O Lucifer, son of the morning. And more recently, in the New King James, How you are fallen from heaven, O Lucifer, son of the morning. Other translations translate it as day star or bright morning star. The um, the Revised Version says, How art thou fallen from heaven, O day star, son of the morning. Uh, the NEB says, how you have fallen from heaven, bright morning star. The New Revised Standard Version says, How you are fallen from heaven, O day star, son of dawn. The NIV says, How you have fallen from heaven, O morning star, son of the dawn. And the GNB says, King of Babylon, King of Babylonia, bright morning star, you have fallen from heaven. Luther, this is Martin Luther, translated this into German, meaning you beautiful morning star. Isaiah uses it as a name for the king of Babylon who had set himself among the gods. Um, as I said earlier, Tertullian, who lived in 160 to 220 AD, was the first of the church fathers who taught that Satan was a fallen angel by quoting Ezekiel chapter 28 against Markion 2, verse 10. Origen, spelled Origen, also quoted Isaiah 14 and Ezekiel 28 and Luke 10:18 to teach that Satan or Lucifer had fallen from glory in heaven. Although rejected by the reformers, this teaching was popularized through Milton's vivid description of Satan's rebellion and fall in book 1 of Paradise Lost. And now, at least on a popular level in the church, seems to be accepted without being questioned. Hi, Chris. Isaiah chapters 13 through 23 contain prophecies against the pagan nations, though. Chapters 13 and 14 are a prophecy specifically against the pride of Babylon, made 150 years before the rise of the empire. So that kingdom of Babylon had not even risen to power when Isaiah was written. The most significant king of Babylon was Nebuchadnezzar. The kings who followed him were insignificant, with there only being 5 kings in a period of 23 years. The prophecies in Isaiah 13 and 14 fit the character of the Babylonian Empire, specifically King Nebuchadnezzar, perfectly. Chapter 14, verses 2 through 23 is a taunt against the king of Babylon, which Israel should take up after they have been restored to the land and have rest from their pain and turmoil, which is described in the first 3 verses of chapter 14 of Isaiah. There is peace on earth, but Sheol, which is the land of the dead, and it is not hell, Sheol is stirred up, as it says in verse 9 of chapter 14 of Isaiah. as the dead world leaders are astonished when they greet the king of Babylon, saying that he has become as weak as they are. His pomp has been brought down to Sheol. The passage, often claimed to be a description of the fall of Satan, is contained in this taunt. The one who laid the nations low in verse 12 will also be brought down to Sheol in verse 15, where the dead will ponder over him, asking if this is the man who made the earth tremble in verse 16. So how people can say this is about Satan is beyond me. The king of Babylon was the one who laid the nations low. Uh, this is precisely what Nebuchadnezzar did when he expanded his empire by conquering the known world. Isaiah said that he said in his heart that I will ascend to heaven. This is translated as the top of the clouds in the NIV. This phrase does not necessarily speak about Satan exalting himself to excessive pride, as seen in the following examples. Daniel said to Nebuchadnezzar in Daniel 4, verse 22, "Your greatness has increased and reaches to heaven." Jesus asked Capernaum, "Will you be exalted to heaven?" in Matthew chapter 11, verse 23. There are 5 statements of the king exalting himself, each saying, "I will," in Isaiah 14, verses 13 and 14. These also fit Nebuchadnezzar's character perfectly, so it does not have to be describing an angelic being. Isaiah says that he is brought down to Sheol, the depths of the pit, in verse 15. Hi, Ken. Good to see you. Sheol was the place of the dead in the Old Testament. This verse describes Nebuchadnezzar's death and the surprise of the dead kings in Sheol who greeted him, rather than Satan being brought down to earth. The same picture is given in the previous oracle when the dead kings expressed surprise of Nebuchadnezzar's becoming as weak as them in Isaiah 14, 9 through 11. He is described as the man who made the earth tremble, who shook kingdoms in verse 16. Nebuchadnezzar certainly did this through military conquest. It is difficult to see how Satan could be described as a man who shook kingdoms. He also made the world a desert and overthrew its cities, according to verse 17 of Isaiah chapter 14. Famine and starvation accompanied the invading armies of Nebuchadnezzar. When many cities through the Middle East, including Jerusalem, were overthrown. He was also the one who would not let his prisoners go home, according to verse 17 of Isaiah chapter 14. This fits the policy of Nebuchadnezzar, who deported captured people and made them settle in camps outside the city of Babylon. You can read about that in Ezekiel chapter 1, verse 1. Now let's look at Ezekiel 28, verses 11 through 19. Ezekiel chapters 25 through 32 are prophecies against pagan nations. Chapters 26 to 28 are specifically against Tyre, a major city, an important port and wealthy commercial center at that time. Under its ruler, Ethbaal III, who ruled from BC 590 to BC 573, Ezekiel described Tyre's trading with other nations in chapter 27, verses 12 through 25, and gave dramatic oracles about the ships and sailors of Tarshish wailing over the fall of Tyre. You can find that in chapter 27 of Ezekiel, verses 25 through 36. The king of Tyre is just described as the signet of perfection, full of wisdom and perfect in beauty in chapter 28 of verse 12. Many say only Satan could be this, not a king or a city. However, elsewhere in the same oracles against Tyre, Tyre claimed this for itself. O Tyre, you have said, I am perfect in beauty. That's found in chapter 27, verse 3 of Ezekiel. Your heart is proud, and you have said, I am a god, in chapter 28, verse 2 of Ezekiel. The prince of Tyre's wisdom, trade, and great wealth are described in chapter 28, verses 4 and 5. The prince of Tyre compared his mind with the mind of a god in chapter 28, verse 6. The Hebrew here is Elohim, which can either mean God or pagan gods, plural. So translations vary. Ezekiel also prophesies that the most terrible of the nations shall draw their swords against the beauty of your splendor. That's found in verse 7 of Ezekiel 28. He was in Eden, the garden of God. That's found in verse 13 of 28 in Ezekiel. This probably does not refer to Satan's presence in the Garden of Eden in the account of the fall of Genesis, in Genesis 3, as Eden is often used poetically in the scriptures to depict a fertile place of great plenty. Elsewhere in Ezekiel, Egypt was likened to a cedar of Lebanon. The cedars in the Garden of God could not rival it. The envy of all the trees of Eden that were in the garden of God. That's found in Ezekiel chapter 31, verses 8 and 9. Ezekiel also predicts that when Israel is restored, people will say, this land that was desolate has become like the Garden of Eden. Ezekiel chapter 36, verse 35. No, the pit is not hell. The pit is Sheol, which is the place of the dead. In fact, the Hebrews did not know anything of hell. Anytime you read a translation that has an Old Testament verse that uses the word hell, that's a mistranslation, because the Hebrew word is Sheol, which is place of the dead. It is not hell. And there's not it's just a place where the dead dwell. There's not a good side and a bad side according to what the Jews believed anyway at that time. But that's a good question. Ezekiel also predicts that when Israel is restored, people will say, this land that was desolate has become like the Garden of Eden, Ezekiel 36, verse 35. Joel said this about the locust swarm. Before them, the land is like the Garden of Eden, and after them, a desolate wilderness. Joel chapter 2, verse 3. And in Genesis, Lot saw that the plain of Jordan was well watered, like the garden of the Lord. Genesis 13, verse 10. Right, that's right, Ken. The description continues by saying that every precious stone was your covering. That's Ezekiel chapter 28, verse 13. This does not have to be a description of Satan, as throughout history, kings have worn richly decorated garments. There is also a similarity with the list of precious stones on the breastplate of the high priest, found in Ezekiel chapter 28, verse 17. God says that With an anointed cherub as guardian, I placed you. That's chapter 28 of Ezekiel, verse 14. The New Revised Standard has a footnote saying that the meaning of the Hebrew is uncertain. The King James Version reads verse 14 as, "Thou art the anointed cherub that covereth, and I have set thee so." A cherub, plural cherubim, is one of the four living creatures described in Ezekiel chapter 1 and in Revelation chapter 4, whose job it is to guard the throne of God and to worship God. They are associated with God's glory and judgment. Other than this passage in the King James Version, Satan is never described as a cherub in the Bible. Neither are the archangels Michael or Gabriel. So this verse cannot be used to claim that Satan was once an angelic being. The king of Tyre's judgment and fall were due to the abundance of its trade filling them with violence. That's according to verse 16 of Ezekiel chapter 28. Tyre was renowned around the ancient Near East as an important port and commercial center. One common argument used to support the view that Satan is a fallen angel says that Ezekiel chapter 28 distinguishes between the prince of Tyre in verse 2, who they say was the physical ruler of Tyre, and the king of Tyre in verse 12, who they say is Satan. However, a study of Ezekiel's use of the words king and prince shows that they are used interchangeably. For example, David is called king in verse 37, in chapter 37, verse 29, but prince in chapter 34, verse 24, and in 37, verse 25. Jehoiakim is called king in chapter 1, verse 2, but in chapter 19 is a lamentation for the princes of Israel, Jehoahaz, Jehoiakim, and Zedekiah, all of whom were kings. In chapter 7, verse 27, king and prince are used in the parallelism. The king shall mourn, the prince shall be wrapped in despair. So what do we know about the origin of Satan? Well, the bottom line is that we don't know much at all about the origin of Satan, and we're probably not meant to know the origin of Satan. God does not reveal everything to us. He reveals what we need to know. And it's important not to speculate on what God chooses not to reveal to us or to make additions to the biblical revelation. We have to be satisfied with what information we are given by God. In the end, does it really matter? We know that Satan exists and that he is a deceiver and a liar. That is enough, isn't it? We also know that he is defeated by Jesus' death on the cross and his resurrection, according to Colossians chapter 2, verse 15, and 1 John chapter 3, verse 8. We also can be certain of his destiny of eternal torment in the lake of fire and sulfur. I'm sure that Satan enjoys people being taught about his glorious past so that people think that he was some glamorous figure rather than the liar, deceiver, adversary, accuser, condemner, and that he really is all these things. The Bible has nothing positive to say about Satan at all. There are only two clues about the origin of Satan in the Bible. Jesus told the Pharisees, "You are from your father, the devil." He was a murderer from the beginning and does not stand in the truth. John chapter 8, verse 44. From the beginning probably means for all the time that he has existed. Also, in John's first letter, everyone who commits sin is a child of the devil, for the devil has been sinning from the beginning. 1 John chapter 3, verse 8. These passages would indicate that the devil has always been a sinner and a murderer, and that he has no great and beautiful past. Even though it causes philosophical problems on a practical level, there's very little difference between something that was created evil and something that was created good and became evil. The significant matter is that Satan exists and is evil now. Again, this is a question that is not answered in the Bible. God either created Satan as an adversary, or Satan later became an adversary. I believe he was created as an adversary. The end result is that Satan is the adversary of God. One of the reasons for Satan's existence is so that humans, as God's created beings, should endure some testing. It is never God's will that we sin, but it is God's will that we are tested and tempted. Consistently through the New Testament, it is taught that testing is a part of the Christian walk. Please refer to James chapter 1, verses 2 through 4. So that we learn patience. Our faith is strengthened. Our love for God is proven. Our love for God has to be a positive response and choice. In order to choose to love God, it is necessary to have the opposite influence, to choose to reject God and his love. What the commentaries and the Bible handbooks say is something much different as well. I've yet to find a commentary which, by looking at the whole book and the relevant passages in context, teaches with any degree of certainty that either Isaiah or Ezekiel 28 describe the fall of Satan. However, there are plenty of topical books on spiritual warfare that quote these passages saying they're definitely describing Satan's fall. But in the Kiel Delitzsch commentary, the fall of Satan mentioned and rejected is Isaiah 14 and not mentioned in Ezekiel 28. Matthew Henry makes no mention of Satan in either Isaiah 14 or Ezekiel 28. In the Expositor's Bible commentary, Jeffrey Grogan, writing on Isaiah 14, says it points to Satan indirectly as working through world rulers, but not describing the fall of Satan. Also in the Expositor's Bible commentary, Ralph Alexander, who was writing on Ezekiel, says it is difficult to understand this passage as describing the fall of Satan. He says that Satan was the force behind the king of Tyre, as he is behind all anti-Christian governments, but that there's no scriptural backing for using this as a description of Satan's fall. In an older edition of the one-volume New Bible Commentary by Derek Kidner, he sees the similarity between Isaiah 14 and the pride and downfall of Satan in Luke chapter 10, but sees the biblical descriptions of Satan's fall as the breakup of and destruction of his kingdom, not his fall from grace. In the same volume, when commenting on Ezekiel chapter 28, G.R. Beasley Murray makes no mention of Satan. In the one-volume International Bible Commentary, David Payne, writing on Isaiah, says, it is inappropriate that Lucifer is the name for for Satan, and F. Bruce, writing on Ezekiel, says that this passage contributed some details to the traditional picture of the fall of Satan, but makes no other comment. In his commentary on Isaiah, Calvin makes some strong statements. He says that saying Lucifer refers to Satan has arisen out of ignorance, as the context clearly must be understood in reference to the king of Babylon. He continues by saying, but when passages of scripture are taken up at random and no attention is paid to the context, we need to wonder that mistakes, we need not wonder that mistakes of this kind frequently arise. Yet it was an instance of very gross ignorance to imagine that Lucifer was the king of the devils and that the prophet Isaiah gave him this name. But as these intentions have no probability whatsoever, let us pass by them as useless fables. In his 3-volume commentary on Isaiah, Edward Young dismisses any idea of Satan being mentioned in Isaiah 14. He sees this passage describing the downfall and removal of a tyrannical king, Babylon, rather than Satan falling from heaven. John N. Oswalt, commenting on Isaiah 14, mentions that certain of the church fathers taught this passage and taught the fall of Satan, but that the reformers dismissed this when the book is studied in context. He says this passage describes human pride rather than angelic pride, and says that the day star, Lucifer, is the planet Venus. Barry Webb tries to seek a balance, and he wrote about Isaiah 14, verses 3 through 23, and he said, the cosmic sweep of the poem led some early interpreters and many since then to see here a symbolic description of the fall of Satan. But if this reads too much into the text, and I think it does, it is equally misguided to reduce it to a description of the fall of a particular earthly monarch, the king of Babylon here. Like Babylon itself in chapter 13 is a representative figure, the embodiment of that worldly arrogance that defies God and tramples on others in its lust for power. Alec Moitier notes that in chapter 14 of Isaiah, it is alluding to the Canaanite myth of Hellel or Ishtar, who attempted a heavenly coup but failed. However, he makes no mention of this being a description of Satan. In his 2-volume commentary on Ezekiel, Daniel I. Block makes this comment. Since the time of Origen, many conservative Christians in particular have equated the king of Tyre with Lucifer, equaling Satan. Accordingly, Ezekiel's prophecy is thought to recount the circumstances of the original fall of Satan, who had previously been one of the cherubim attending the throne of God, but those who interpret the oracles historically reject this approach. Ezekiel's prophecy is indeed within the context, clearly referring to the human king of Tyre. In any case, for the prophet and his professional colleagues, as well as for the Hebrew historiographic narrators, human rebellion is problem enough. A detailed treatment of the origin of the demonic is not to be expected from the Old Testament. In a footnote, he also gives a list of books which use this passage in Ezekiel to teach the fall of Satan. In his commentary on Ezekiel chapter 28, John Taylor makes no mention of Satan. In both Haley's Bible Handbook and the Lion Handbook of the Bible, no mention of Satan is made when the comment when comment is made on either Isaiah 14 or Ezekiel 28. It is only the Hodder Bible Handbook, which is published as Unger's Bible Handbook in the U.S., which says that Isaiah 14 and Ezekiel 28 give revelation of the fall of Satan, but no justification is given for that opinion. So I'm going to conclude with some thoughts. Taking these two passages in their literary and historical contexts, it is very questionable to use an interpretation that claims that they're describing the fall of Satan. In fact, I'd say it's flat out wrong to do that. This teaching is very popular, but it's rejected by many reformers and most evangelical scholars and most modern commentaries. The Bible appears to give little or no information about the origin of Satan or of evil, but very clearly describes the defeat of Satan through the death and resurrection of Jesus and his final judgment with great certainty. It is not necessary for teaching on spiritual warfare to include an explanation of the origin of Satan. Spiritual warfare is real, and it is important to develop a biblical understanding of it. The existence of evil beings is assumed in the Bible, and their work consistently mentioned, particularly in the New Testament. Christians are given the assurance, though, that Jesus' victory over the powers of darkness has occurred, even though they are still active in this world to a degree until the time of final judgment. I don't know if anybody has anything else to add. I do want to reiterate, if you have not listened to my series of studies on Revelation, I encourage you to go back to those, because I make it very clear that nothing in Revelation is about the end of all things, the final judgment. It's about the destruction of Jerusalem and the persecution of the church, and nothing more in 70 AD. And I'm happy to study privately with anybody who disagrees. Hi, Brenda. Good to see you. But please go back and look at my studies on Revelation. I did that a few months ago. I went through 22 chapters in probably 10 lessons, I think. Something like that, 10 or 12 lessons. I tried to make it as easy to understand as possible, because I think it's real easy to get lost in minutia and using PhD terms and stuff. Just, there's no reason to try to speak like somebody that I'm not, and I don't want to try to explain things that in a way that people can't understand it. So otherwise it's not explaining. I do hope you all will see that. But bottom line, I don't see anything in the New Testament or Old Testament that clearly teaches that Satan was an angel that fell from heaven. And the passages that were used or are used to refer to that, I've shown, I believe, I've shown very clearly in this lesson tonight that none of those are being used correctly. Hi, Lori. Welcome, Brenda. That's all I really have, but I do want to say that I'll probably have an occasional live lesson that I will present on something else that I think needs to be looked at because there are too many people teaching something incorrectly about it. So look forward to those in the near future. I'm doing much better. Not 100%, but I'm definitely a whole lot better than I was Wednesday and Thursday. Um, Hopefully, I will not have another major increase of pain like I did Wednesday and Thursday. Those were two rough days for me. And I was better Friday, but I rested all day Friday anyway. And I sang a little Saturday night, but that was my first time to do anything. And I didn't really go anywhere Saturday either. So thank you for asking about me. Also, there is a very good chance that my dad will be living with me again and that we're both going to move into a different location. Uh, I think I found a place that's very good for him and me, and it's a 3 bedroom, 2.5 bath house or duplex, but it's still a house. And I think uh, that might work out. So maybe by January, I could be in a new location and have my dad living with me again at 95 years old. So I hope to take care of him to his last day. Um, no, it's not arthritis. I have nerve damage that goes from my neck to my left fingers in my hand, all the way down my arm. I also have pinched ulnar nerves in both elbows, and I have a torn labrum in both shoulder joints. But the main problem is my nerve pain. But I'm going to see a pain management clinic on December 6th. So I hope that goes well. They gave me prednisone and they gave me a Toradol shot when I went to the ER Thursday. And that seemed to help a lot. And I'm taking gabapentin 4 times a day. And I think that's helping. But the downside is my job requires heavy lifting, which just aggravates my condition, makes it worse. But, you know, I got to work. So hopefully things will improve. But I appreciate everyone who came by and listened to this lesson. Yeah, I'm on gabapentin. I just have to take 4 doses a day to make a difference. I hadn't noticed that it made me want to eat. I only had 2 meals today, but it does sometimes make me a bit hyper. And I'm a little worried that it might make me feel like I'm a little better off than I am and I might overdo it when I'm at work. So keep me in your thoughts and prayers. And I do hope that you will tune in tomorrow night. I will have a open mic karaoke night show tomorrow night. And then my Bible studies, if I'm up to it, will continue this coming Wednesday. And we're continuing to work through the book of Romans on my Wednesday night Bible studies. Yeah, I understand. Thank you all. Um, I'm not going to do anything else. I'm just going to end the stream, but I just wanted to share whether or not Satan fell from heaven and was an angel of God before he was Satan. And no, I don't think any of that's true. And if you want to study further, I'm willing to do that privately anytime. Um, my email address is in my About section on my YouTube channel. Thank you. Y'all have a good night. God bless.